The following is a live presentation of the Commercial Appeal.
I really like this team. I like their attitude. I like the physicality which they're playing with. I think this, we put ourselves in a position to get ready to take the next step, and the next step is here on Saturday. And people, I've been asked quite a bit about the meaning of this game and the importance of this game. This is a huge game, no question about it. It's a huge game because it's the next game.
This is the Tiger Football Podcast with Tom Shad, Geoff Calkins, and Phil Stukenborg.
What's up, y'all? Ole Miss week 4, I guess week 5. Game 4 in week 5 for the University of Memphis. I got the full cast back in studio, Geoff and Phil, Danny pushing the buttons, and we are joined on the phone right off the top here by a special guest, Antonio Morales of the Clarion Ledger, Ole Miss beat reporter. Going to get a little Ole Miss flavor here right at the top. Antonio, thanks for joining us.
How you guys doing?
Not too bad, man. Hey, so the big theme here, at least kind of the sense, is that there's kind of a revenge theme down in Oxford, that after what happened last year, the guys, fans have said, Hugh probably wants to put 100 on Memphis after what happened last year. What is the sense that you get down there? Is there anything to that you think these guys want revenge?
They were asked about it a lot yesterday, and Hugh Freeze said he's not going to go into the game saying we have to do such and such because of what happened last year. He said he's not really big on revenge. And you have guys like Johnny Youngblood, defensive end, who said he thinks revenge as a social motivation is kind of overrated. And so the guys are saying like they're thinking about last year's game, but it's not like the first thing on their mind. It's not the reason they want to win this game is because what happened last year.
It's funny, like, is Geoff Calkins here? I went to the Hugh Freeze's, one of his tour stop essentially in Memphis before the season began, and there was no question that it wasn't just Freeze, it was the AD who was asked about this, and he said he got untold messages like stop playing Memphis, stop playing Memphis, stop playing Memphis, and people were truly unhappy. They just don't want to lose to what they perceive to be an inferior program. And Hugh is not above, like we saw him at Arkansas State. I guess it's clearly not the main motivation. The main motivation is to win. But don't you believe deep down they would, there's a little sting at least left from last year?
Yeah, probably a little bit. I know Gerald McDowell was asked if they took it personal, just how Memphis' offense has handled Ole Miss's defense towards the end of the game last year. And he said, yeah, it's a little, so we do take it a little personal. Then he went on to say how they're not thinking about the past, but he did say that it was a little personal how they were handled against Memphis last season. But I'm sure there's a little part of them that probably wants revenge, even though they're not saying it. I mean, I imagine they would.
Antonio, this is Phil Stukenborg. I was going to ask you something about switch gears a little bit, and let's talk about Chad Kelly. We knew last year, Geoff and I think were down at the media day for Ole Miss, and wasn't quite certain if Chad was going to be the starter, according to the coaches talking, but everyone kind of knew he was going to emerge. How much better do you think he's been during the course of the first 4 games of the season?
I mean, especially last week, he played awesome last week, and he's been good just when he's protected the ball. He's had his moments where he's turned it over. It's really cost the team against Alabama. Led to 14 points, and they lost by 5. He gave Florida State two short fields in the second half, which really hurt, and was one of the reasons they blew a 22-point lead. So he's been good when he's been protecting the ball. He's been amazing. I mean, he has good receivers who know the ball too, and they really helped him out on Saturday against Georgia. But it's when he's not protecting the ball, it's when him and the team get in trouble. They're 0-2 whenever he turns the ball over, and 2-0 when he doesn't turn it over. But he's been playing well overall. But he's asked to do a lot, though. Just considering the running game is what it is, and the running back position lacks depth. So you figure with all that pressure on him, some turnovers are going to happen.
What is the overall sense? Obviously, the start of the schedule there was pretty brutal with Florida State, Alabama, but then you really beat up on Georgia there last week. What is the sense, I guess, around the team in terms of confidence and just how the season's gone so far? Do you feel like this team is kind of maybe not comfortable with where it's at, but at least confident here moving forward?
Yeah, I think they're confident moving forward. They said they didn't lose confidence after the 1-2 start, but they said that the Georgia win kind of helped restore the way things were when you beat a number 11 team in the country, when you beat them by 31 and you're leading by 45. So I think they're kind of pleased with where they're at right now, and if they were to get a win this weekend, it would help. It would help them kind of build some momentum heading into the bye week with 2 straight wins.
All right, we'll get you out of here on this. How do you see the game unfolding Saturday? What do you think is going to happen?
I think it's going to be a high-scoring game. I think Ole Miss is going to put a lot of points on the board. They put a lot of points on the board against everybody. I think their secondary is going to get tested. The secondary's been improved the past couple of weeks, but it's still really young. And that's the thing. The secondary is young, but I mean, in the SEC, there's not many really great quarterbacks that are going to be able to take advantage of it. So it'll be interesting to see how they match up with Riley Ferguson, Memphis quarterback, and how they match up. Obviously, been putting points on everybody. So I think it's going to be a high-scoring affair on Saturday with Ole Miss having the edge, I believe.
Cool. Well, thanks again for joining us, Antonio. You can read all about Ole Miss here in the week leading up, ClarionLedger.com. Antonio, thanks for joining us, man.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yep. So I think it's interesting. I mean, the revenge thing has got to be a factor.
It's huge.
Right.
It's not just that they were beaten last year, beaten on national television. I mean, every SEC game's back then national television, but it was a signature game that people noticed. It was embarrassing to Hugh Freeze, who spent a good deal of his life here in Memphis, and then not only that, Robert Nkemdiche gets hurt. Let's be honest, they weren't happy with the headline in this newspaper. Ole Miss people were not happy with the photo. With the photo in the newspaper.
Combination, but yeah.
The play of the photo. What was the headline? No, it was the whole thing. It was
not like smash hit.
Yeah, no, it was a borderline insensitive headline, and it was the whole thing. Like they were sent home with their tail between their legs. They were. And so the idea that it's not meaningful to them, maybe not meaningful to a first-year player, whatever, but of course they want to put 50 on Memphis. I have no doubt they want to put 50 on Memphis, and Hugh Freeze is not going to let up if they're in a position to do so until they do.
Now, does that, in a way, because I've been thinking about kind of how that game unfolded last year, I thought it was interesting. The turning point seemed to me when Ole Miss was up by 14, they go for it on 4th and 1 or something in the red zone instead of taking the points. It seemed to me like Freeze was pressing a little bit and wanting to kind of put up the score. Do you think that wanting revenge and everything that we just talked about could actually work to Memphis's benefit in that way, that they could press a little bit more, or do you think that's bad news for Memphis if they want revenge?
I don't think it makes any difference. I don't think Ole Miss is going to be so anxious for revenge that they are going to come like a boxer coming out swinging wildly and open itself to a counter punch. I don't believe that at all. First of all, they're in their home crowd. If things go badly, they'll have their home crowd behind them.
Sure.
I mean, I'll just say it. I don't see Memphis winning this game. I think Ole Miss is really good. They've played Alabama, Florida State, and Georgia, smashed Georgia, put up huge points, and then obviously fell apart. To me, it's the key is if you're going to beat them, it very clearly will involve turnovers, which plays to a Memphis strength. It'll be interesting to see. Do we believe that turnover thing that the Grizzlies, was a media day yesterday, that the Tigers, they also have historically forced turnovers, that they force turnovers. Do we believe that is something that's sustainable? Because that is, to me, it's the two weaknesses are Ole Miss's secondary and Chad Kelly's penchant for turning the ball over fit perfectly with Memphis's strengths, which is they can strike deep and fast, and they have been taking the ball away. That's how they would beat them, were they to beat them. But I don't see Ole Miss unraveling because of they're in a hurry to clobber Memphis.
That would be a great story, Tom. I think we should write that this week. Something I'm working on. But the other thing is when Memphis has won back-to-back games, it's been with talent like D'Angelo Williams back in the 10 or so years ago. They only won in Oxford back in the 90s. That's the first time they'd won. Ole Miss still leads the series like 48-10 or 11. So there's still that thought that we are better, and this is. I don't think there's going to be a situation where Memphis is going to come in there and have a chance to, I don't know, just kind of do what they've done last year. It's a football game, so you never know.
And we obviously saw in Memphis 77-point explosion that you saw something you needed to see, which was you don't need to see 77 points, but you need to see an efficient offensive performance. You need to see Dorland Dorcius get on track. You needed to see the offensive line show some ability to protect Riley Ferguson. You needed to see all those things. And so to me, that if you had asked me before last week, I would have thought it would have been more one-sided. At least Memphis has shown that they have the capacity to play a complete game, have started to figure it out on the offensive side of things. But let's not forget, before Justin Fuente beat Ole Miss, like down in Oxford, it was close. It was close because the defense was unbelievably good, and he played it close to the vest, and they sort of kept it close. But it was also an unbelievably physical game.
It was, and you remember that Dorcius went out early in that game,
right,
which would have maybe helped a lot. But yeah, I think that showed a lot at that point with that team, and it
showed growth.
Yeah, it could have been part of a turning point of that season and how things turned around.
And it was a loss. It was a loss, but it still showed you something, and that's a possibility here that you could emerge. And I'm not condemning them to lose. I think they could. I'm not saying they can't win. But that loss was a loss, not unlike the UCLA loss, which sort of gave you faith that things were going in the right way for Memphis. And I don't foreclose that as a possibility, that they could lose in a way that makes you still feel pretty good about them as they go into the conference season.
What do you think? I'm interested in the dynamic, and I know you asked Coach Norvell after the game, coming off of, obviously they haven't played anybody very good to this point in the season, but coming off a 74-point win, I saw Paul Meyerberg of USA Today said that was the largest margin of victory FBS team versus FBS team since 2003, the 74-point win. How does that change the dynamic, like going from a game like that where the game was over like 8 minutes into the first quarter. I mean, it was already so lopsided. How does that change the dynamic? Like, do you think, because on the one hand, like I think it gives them a lot of confidence, like they feel invincible, but that could also kind of backfire.
I think Coach Norvell answered this, I think, perhaps even in the answer to that question. It's about, and you've said it before too, like what happens when adversity strikes? Like when was Justin Fuente and this team and that team, when were they at their best? When they had to be, right? That was in the end, the hallmark of last year was whether it was against Cincinnati or whether it was against Bowling Green or like whenever they were challenged, they go down to Ole Miss, they responded. Right. And because they had this, I do believe, this deep belief in themselves, and it enables you to respond. And I think what the 3 wins, and then in particularly the 74-point win and everything, I think it's what Norvell said was it helps build trust. You're doing what he says. It's producing success. We trust it. We do it over again. And so when they will be tested, which they will be finally this week, it gives them a reservoir of trust to draw on. Will that be enough? I don't know, but I think that's what it does for them.
It stretches back to even the year before that, I think, with the Miami Beach Bowl, where they kind of picked up and they handled the adversity pretty well. We were talking to Chris Ball after practice, and I think one thing he said was when this staff came in, they took over a team that was, again, pretty well stocked. So I think that they may carry some of that over, that knowing how to deal with adversity. I think you may see some of that Saturday.
It's interesting to me, just the schedule, and I feel like I'm always harping on like the schedule and how it's played out.
It's terrible the way this is going to play out, though. Like to have this and then to have Temple on Thursday. That's not good.
Well, and just I'm thinking, last year entering the Ole Miss game, they had played Bowling Green, which was nuts. Then they had played Cincinnati, which was nuts. So they had withstood 2 pretty good tests. And then people forget about that USF game. Like they did not run away with the USF game. Like they had to battle to hold on to that, and then they had a bye week entering it. So like just in terms of circumstances, like with the schedule, everything laid out pretty well. Like they had gained the confidence of having been through adverse games. They had an extra week to prepare with the bye week. Like this is just a completely different. Like I don't know if I would say it's polar opposite, but just in terms of circumstances, I mean it's just a completely different setup. And
and it's funny. While I said that Memphis's strengths in a way hook up nicely with Ole Miss's weaknesses, I will also say that Ole Miss's strengths also hook up very nicely to Memphis's weaknesses, which is, they've got a tremendous defensive line, just a tremendous defensive line, unbelievable speed up front. And we know probably the biggest weakness, obviously there's only one sack, I think, this past week, but has been the offensive line. So Ole Miss might be able to be in a position where they can just wreak havoc on Riley Ferguson. And then, and their wide receivers are so good. Like, it's funny, Memphis only gave up 3 points the other night. But early on, like the secondary was challenged in a way that now Bowling Green was dropping the ball and everything else, but the secondary is better. But is it like Ole Miss better? That will be a huge challenge because Ole Miss's receivers are just out of this world. And so how will Memphis and this improved secondary hold up?
Well, the thing that I was struck with, like I watched part of the Ole Miss Florida State game on TV, is like all of Ole Miss's wide receivers are huge.
They're huge.
Like they're gigantic. And Memphis's biggest corner, I think, is Dontrell Nelson. He's like 6'1", 6'2". Like Arthur Mollett, for as good as he's been, and he's been terrific in the first 3 games, is still a 5'10" guy. So you got him going up against, a 6'5".
Right. Big receivers. Yeah.
I mean, it's just a completely different. And then the offensive line.
And they beat the hell out of Georgia's quarterback. They did. Just beat the hell out of him. So we know that Riley Ferguson is, and it's funny because I don't mean to blow what I said after the first game was, I like Riley Ferguson because the good things I think he can keep doing, and I think he can stop doing. I think the bad things are things that he can stop doing, and we've seen it. Like he stopped doing those things. He started throwing the ball away, stopped throwing picks, whatever else. But it's a different thing to not do those bad things when you have Ole Miss bearing down on you.
And the offensive line continues to shuffle. I know that's been a theme all season, but they've got their new, according to the depth chart that they put out yesterday, left guard is Dustin Woodard, who's a true freshman and who has been good but came in as a center. Not a small guy, I guess just relative to everybody around him. He looks a little bit smaller. He's like 6'2", 285. And then they've bumped Gabe Kuhn, who's playing right tackle, into right guard, and are starting Jace Neville, who got his first career start 2 weeks ago or whatever, at right tackle. So there's still a lot of flux in that position. They got Zach Collins back, which helps, and he's kind of providing depth there at left guard.
Why isn't he starting? I
think it's just a matter of time, personally. But I mean, we'll see. I don't know if he's fully back worked into where he can play 70, 80 snaps. But it is interesting that there's still some shuffling. And that was, I thought one of the keys to that Ole Miss game was that they just put Chris Roberson, who I don't know he had started against Bowling Green because Taylor Fallon was injured. But they put him out there at left guard for the first time. And that ended up being a huge part of the game, I thought, because he was blocking Kimdichie. He was just putting like a larger body in front of Kimdichie. So I'll be interested to see what they do on the offensive line, who they put up there, what kind of combination they go with, and then if they can have any success against that, because that D-line is pretty good.
You had Chris Roberson at right tackle who had been playing guard, and that has to be a difficult transition. You're dealing with so much more open space, different techniques, your kick out, slide, just the way you have to block. There's so many things that you just wonder how that all fit in, and what will he have, and what are the 5 people that he wants to be there that have shown, I guess, the best propensity to play and play well. So that's what we're.
And then to me, the other thing is let's not forget the other reason that they won last year was that Paxton Lynch had the game of his life. He was unbelievable. That was the game in retrospect when Lee Steinberg first showed up to the first game of Paxton's that he'd seen. And you go back and you look at some of those highlights and some of the throws he made. I mean, he was far and away the best player on the field. And so it'll be a test. I mean, it is interesting. How good do you think Riley Ferguson is? Remember, before the season began, the whole thing was game manager, not make mistakes, blah, blah, blah. Now he's thrown for 6 touchdowns and a half and running for another. How good is Riley Ferguson?
You know what impressed me last weekend, and you may see other things from him, but his ability he had a better sense in the pocket, and he seemed to step up and make some good throws. I think especially the one might have been to Sam Kraft. or either late to Roderick Proctor.
Proctor,
yeah, that was the one. I just noticed that he felt the pressure, and he just calmly stepped up and avoided it and made a great throw.
Right. By the way, is there any subplot with Jannard Avery, who's been tremendous? Like, he's been tremendous. Is there any subplot? Have you gotten him this week? Have they made him available?
We talked to him after the game on Saturday, and we asked him a bunch of questions about Ole Miss, and he just smiled.
Wasn't going there.
Yeah, he was not touching it with a 10-foot pole. And I still don't know. Jannard is one of the nicest kids, and I think he's just still so embarrassed by what happened. And I still don't know the full story with that, but he just seems so embarrassed, and there's no lingering thing. Like, he's just trying to laugh it off and try to
put it behind him. He's been great, obviously.
Yeah, and he's been terrific so far this season. So, all right. So, do any of us think that they're going to win? Do we think it? What are we expecting? I guess the same question that I asked Antonio. Like, what are we expecting? How's the game going to play out?
I think it'll be. I think Memphis will score some, but I mean, this is. Listen, you can go either of two ways here. You can say the obvious thing, which is Ole Miss is going to win, because Ole Miss almost always wins these games because they're a ranked team, because they clobbered Georgia. Or you can be, you can go out on a limb and say Memphis is going to win, but no one knows. Like, I didn't think Memphis was going to win last year. I thought Memphis was going to get murdered last year. And after Ole Miss goes up 14-0, I really thought Ole Miss was going to get murdered last year, and they didn't. I think Memphis is going to get murdered again. Not murdered, but I think Ole Miss will cover. Because I think they want to cover. I think Hugh Freeze wants to cover. And so I'll say it's going to be 43-17, something like that, but 41-17. I think it'll be 41-17 because I don't think they want to stop scoring. I think those receivers are really good. But can I imagine a scenario where we get in the second half and Chad Kelly's turning it over and Riley Ferguson's doing exactly what he did? Yeah, I can imagine that scenario. But if you ask me what I think will happen, it's like 41-17, something like that.
Phil?
Yeah, I'll go back to something Jeff said earlier. Just, you had Paxton Lynch on the field last year. Now you have Riley Ferguson making his third or fourth start at this level. I think that just comes into play at some point. And the receivers, if you watch some of that Georgia game last week with Ole Miss, Kelly put balls right where he needed to be to his much taller receivers. And there was no way the defensive backs for Georgia could defend it. I mean, he just put it in the right spot. So we'll have an opportunity to do more of that Saturday. So yeah, it'll be very difficult.
I think it'll be a little bit closer. I mean, they'll probably still, what's the line at now? 13.5 or 14, something like that. I mean, they'll probably still cover, but I think it'll be a little bit closer. Just because you mentioned the turnovers. I think the turnover thing is going to continue. Like, I think that a lot of that, and, Phil's going to have something on that here in the next couple of days. I think a lot of that is just positioning. The guys seem to be in the right spot on deflections.
It's aggressiveness, it's mindset, it's
coaching.
It's coaching.
It's coaching, but it's also just guys being in the right place at the right time. And so if a mistake happens, I like their odds of getting a couple turnovers in this game. Now, is that going to mean, like, my big thing too is, like, is Riley then not going to turn the ball over? Or are they not going to have turnovers on the offense? Like, are they not going to have a couple fumbles? So I think that's why I think the defense will force a couple turnovers, but I wouldn't be surprised if the offense.
Because we've talked so much about Ole Miss, I would like to just revel in a moment in last Saturday. It was let's just revel for a moment. Like, it was, because we haven't talked that much about that win, and as you pointed out, it was historic. And for long-suffering Memphis fans who haven't suffered so much the last few years, it is really fun to be on that side of it. It was, again, I heard some complaints about the crowd. I thought the crowd was perfectly fine. 38,000, I thought it was perfectly fine. And it's just like, I mean, Phil, like, you sat through a lot of, you sat through years where 77 points was about half the season.
There was a Rip Shear year where that was the whole season, 77. There was. It was something to see. The other thing that Tom pointed out in his story Sunday was, this is hard to imagine, but if you look back, they're 3-0. They were 3-0 last year to start the season. That hadn't happened since 1928.
Right.
I mean,
consecutive back-to-back
3-0 starts.
And some of that goes because you oftentimes used to open with Ole Miss or Mississippi State or whatever else, and then.
But occasionally you'd get you'd knock them off. But even back in the 50s, you weren't maybe playing them, and you still weren't winning.
Yeah, it's back when you were playing Somerville High School
and
the Memphis Navy.
Right, exactly.
What did we decide that was just like?
I'm sure it was a team out of the base, don't you think?
Yeah.
It was a team out of the base.
Most people thought that was an error in your story. They thought you did Memphis twice.
The Memphis Navy, yeah. Well, anyways, it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds here Saturday.
Do you want to clear up the TV thing? Should we clear up the TV thing?
Oh, should we?
We haven't mentioned the TV thing. My understanding of the TV thing is that tonight, Tuesday, is when the World Hockey Championship continues.
Yep.
If it ends Thursday, it's 2 out of 3. If Canada wins tonight and Thursday, then Memphis will be on ESPN2. If it goes to a Game 3, which will be Saturday, then Memphis will be pushed to SEC alternate. People have asked me about that.
That is exactly, correct? Yep. And we've made note of that somewhere. Yeah. But, okay. Good to reinforce that. Stay tuned. We will be back chat with you all next week. Thanks for listening.
Like the Commercial Appeal on Facebook and follow on Twitter at Memphis News. This is the Commercial Appeal.